Chapter 6. 5 minutes later, they were in his very large, very yellow Hummer, heading toward the bridge to the mainland, and Riley had to agree with Gordon's assessment of the highly visible appearance of Ash's highly visible ride. Plus, the very low speed limit on the island allowed people sitting on their porches and decks, or strolling the walkways beside the road to not only get a good look at the vehicle, but recognize who was riding in it. People waved and called out hellos to both her and Ash. He didn't stop the truck at any point, which at least allowed Riley to merely smile and wave in response to those greetings from strangers. Well, at least there was never anything secretive about the relationship. Points for that, I guess. But there had been secrets in the relationship, obviously, since she hadn't told him the truth about why she'd needed him to leave early the previous night. Unless he had known and was lying about that. Don't borrow trouble, damn it. He doesn't know you've lost your memory, so he isn't lying. About that, anyway. But something else is going on here, because apparently you didn't tell him the truth about why you asked him to leave early, and you don't know why you failed to do that. Then again, perhaps she really had only wanted time to herself, and the fact that something had obviously happened later on had been sheer coincidence. Nah, she really didn't believe in coincidence. You're very quiet, Ash said. That scene in the woods today, Riley shrugged, ruefully aware that then again, perhaps she really had only wanted time to herself, and the fact that something had obviously happened later on had been sheer coincidence. Nah, she really didn't believe in coincidence. You're very quiet, Ash said. That scene in the woods today, Riley shrugged, ruefully aware that shop talk was what sprang most readily to her mind whenever she needed something to fill the silences or the blanks. I've seen a lot worse, but it never gets easier. I was hoping I'd never see anything like it again, Ash said. I got more than my fill of murder scenes in Atlanta. Which told Riley that he had clearly lived and worked in a large city. Most likely, of course, as an attorney of some kind. Interesting that he was here now. Career setback or a deliberate choice? Murder happens everywhere, unfortunately. True enough, but this kind of murder? You seriously think we could have some kind of occult nonsense going on here? A ritual murder? I think that's what it looks like at first glance. Ash frowned. You still have doubts, don't you, despite what you said today? Riley hesitated, then spoke slowly, trying to weigh each word and wondering if she was making a huge mistake in confiding anything at all to this man, even if he was her lover. Maybe because he was her lover. I know that true occult rituals, especially those ending in murder or any other kind of actual sacrifice, are very, very rare, especially the sacrifice part. A lot more rare than some of the media would like people to believe. Rare as in virtually non-existent. Ash nodded, frowning. I remember. The vast majority of occult groups are completely harmless, he said. So we have talked about this. Good, I think. Right. Their rites and practices are merely the trappings of their religious faith. Most such rituals are completely benign, designed to celebrate life and nature. But those that aren't benign are very rare. I get that. And involve actual worship of Satan and the belief in magic, the belief that a specific ritual or rituals can cause supernatural forces to grant the wishes or desires of the practitioner. But even those rarely involve physical sacrifice or murder. So I gather nobody dies, usually. I'm serious, Ash. Okay, so occult rituals, offensive though they may be to the mainstream, are both rare and mostly benign. Yeah, what's a lot more common, though still pretty damn rare, is for someone to borrow the trappings, the ceremonies and rituals, to do his own thing within the framework of the occult. He may or may not possess occult beliefs. He may feel that he believes but not fully understand the rituals he's trying to command. Or it may have nothing to do with faith or belief and be simply window dressing. He may stage a murder scene implicating Satanism or other forms of the occult to confuse or mislead an investigation. He may deliberately use what he knows will frighten and panic his neighbors to cover his tracks. It's been done before. I think I'd believe that before I'd believe in a cult of Satan worshippers conducting a blood sacrifice in the woods a mile from town. It does sound unlikely, doesn't it? Riley brooded. That bothers me as much as anything. The proximity to people, choosing a place where dogs are allowed to run and often do, where people walk most every day. How long would anyone expect their supposed secret to stay that way? Not all groups are secretive, Ash noted. There's one just up the beach from you, as a matter of fact. Purely from his tone, Riley gathered somewhat hesitantly that this wasn't something he expected her to already know, so she risked asking questions. What, a cult? A coven? They aren't calling themselves either, as far as I know. Just a group of like-minded friends renting the Pearson place for the rest of the summer. But they've applied for and been granted permission to build a beach bonfire on Friday night, the full moon. And they've been asking questions, strongly implying they believe there's occult activity in the area. And they've let it be known that they practice an alternative religion. Were they more specific about that? Alternative covers a lot these days. Not that I've heard, so far anyway, but people are talking, of course, especially given what's been happening this summer. Jesus, I wish I could remember how much of this we've already discussed. Can't stop people talking, she ventured. He sent her another glance, dark brows lifting. When the talk is bordering on panic, it's time to... Side note, as I've mentioned in a few other books, sometimes when I get frustrated, I rip a page out. Usually I rip the entire page out, kind of neatly. It seems that I've ripped out the next page of this book. There's some part of it that's still there, but so I looked online, I found a book online, not archived.org, but on some website. So the next page, front and back, I'm gonna read from online from the internet, and then go back to my paperback version of the book. So it's time to try, or at least time to offer them a rational explanation to discuss. I thought we'd agreed about that, Riley. Yeah, she said, I remember. Except that I don't. The cold, queasy feeling in the pit of her stomach got worse, and it wasn't because she needed food. Calls are already coming in, Ash said. No media yet, but that's probably only because their attention is on all the shit happening in Charleston. The hell's happening in Charleston? Riley scrambled for yet another elusive memory or bit of knowledge, and again came up empty. She had absolutely no idea what was going on in the nearest city of any size to Castle. Still, I'm bound to be asked for an official statement of some kind soon, he went on, especially after today. What do you suggest I say on the record? That a murder is being investigated. It won't stop the talk. No, but I can't offer anything else, Ash. Not yet. I need time. Time to get a better grip on what's going on here. I don't like the idea of you working alone on this. Jake and his people are out of their depth. We both know that. Why don't you want to be on the official clock, Riley? Why not call your boss, have him send down some help? The unit's spread really thin right now, Riley answered truthfully. Besides, Jake said an official FBI presence would stand out around here, and he's right. It may be no secret I'm with the Bureau, but at least I won't be flashing my badge or gun and interrogating people. That makes a difference, Ash. It changes how people respond to even a casual question, much less a pointed one. If I can keep my presence low-key, I'm more likely to find out something. Yes, he said, that's what I'm afraid of. It was a Monday evening, but it was also in season for the beach community and surrounding areas. So the restaurant Ash had chosen on the outskirts of Casa was doing brisk business. The good news, as far as Riley was concerned, was that the majority of that business consisted of summer visitors, most of whom didn't know one another. Knowledge or memory? She wasn't sure. Damn it. In any case, if the restaurant's customers on this night even knew a body had been found only a couple of miles away, it didn't appear to be hampering their enjoyment of the quiet music and excellent seafood. Riley did, however, catch at least a couple of... Side note, now, I'm back to on page 91, like in my paperback version of the book. So from whatever the internet version was, glances and smiles aimed toward them as she and Ash were seated in a semi-secluded back corner booth and left alone with their menus, and she murmured, "Nobody looks too panicked." "Yet," he said, "but you can bet word of what was found this afternoon is spreading. By morning, the summer visitors will be uneasy, some to the point of packing up early. The locals will be worried and demanding answers, more calls to my office, that's for sure. But I don't envy Jake, since he and his people will get the brunt of it. Part of the job. Probably not what he signed on for, though, not in Hazard County. You either, I guess." "No," Ash said after a moment. "I didn't sign on for it either." Riley was looking at her menu, but not really studying it. Something else was nagging at her. Jake said nobody'd been reported missing. Yeah. You think who the victim is, or was, might be more important than how he was found? At least as important, surely. No random sacrificial victim? I'll have to do some research, she said, hedging her bets since she couldn't remember just what Ash knew of her background. But offhand, I can't think of any sort of black occult ritual centering around the sacrifice of a victim chosen at random, or just because he happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. Rituals tend to be very controlled, very specific, especially when they involve anything as extreme as a blood sacrifice. So I take it all the urban legends about homeless people disappearing to be used in satanic rites or as part of a black market for organs are just that, urban legends. It was at least half a question, and Riley nodded in response as she met his intent gaze. The vast majority of stories like that are about as real as leprechauns. The Bureau conducted an exhaustive investigation years ago when half the country seemed convinced there were devil worshippers on every corner, and didn't find a shred of evidence to support all the scary claims of ritual human sacrifices during Black Sabbaths. Yet there are genuine satanic rites practiced. Even genuine satanic rites don't involve murder. You have to get beyond conventional Satanism and really out on the fringes to find that sort of thing. Seriously, there are fringes beyond Satanism? You'd be surprised. He really did have the most amazing eyes. She hadn't known eyes came in such a pale shade of green. Not human eyes, at any rate. So if we have occult activity here that involved a ritual murder, it isn't likely those responsible are Satanists. Some fringe groups call themselves Satanists, so it's still possible. Or it's some other group calling themselves something else. Or it's window dressing to hide a murder. Riley sighed. And then there's rumor and speculation and people with their own agendas who keep fanning the flames, who do their best to take a spark of truth and build it into a bonfire of trouble. For instance, she shook her head. I once opened my front door to find a young woman who was attempting to raise money for her church. The spiel was that our children were being threatened by devil worshippers and her church needed money to fight this evil army. She was deadly serious about it. It was in a sweet little town where the worst I ever saw happen was egging a few houses at Halloween, and that poor woman was jumping at shadows and imagining the demons straight out of hell were a breath away from grabbing her babies. People will believe in the damnedest things, especially if the authority figures in their lives tell them something is real. Which is why, Ash said, I still believe our best bet is to treat all this as a series of bizarre hoaxes. Even the murder. You said the killer could be using all the occult trappings just to throw us off the scent. I said it was possible, and it is. But until we know who that victim was, we can't know who might have wanted him dead. Are you going to suggest that to Jake? Riley once again had the vague sense of undercurrents of some kind of long simmering tension between Ash and the sheriff, but couldn't bring it into focus enough to even be sure whether it was professional or personal. Something there, though, definitely something there, and strong if she was aware of it, even with all her senses. Something there, though, definitely something there, and strong if she was aware of it, even with all her senses out of whack. Mildly, she said, I imagine Jake's cop enough to know the basics without needing to be reminded. Ash returned his gaze to his menu. Jake's a politician. I can't tell him how to do his job, Ash. No, I suppose not. His tension was still there. She could feel it. Barely. Where's my clairvoyance when I need it? Hell, where are any of my senses? They were still dulled, blurred, as if she saw and heard and touched and smelled her surroundings through some kind of wispy veil. It felt weird and cold and scary, this sensation of being distanced from the world, being unconnected. She was alone, that much she could sense. Even stranger, her head was hurting again, but not in any way that was familiar to her. Not a dull ache of tension or weariness, not the rare hangover head in a vice agony of having pushed herself way beyond her limits, but sharp little bursts of pain every few seconds, one after the other, in random spots from just above her eyes over the top of her head and back to the nape of her neck. Riley'd had a tooth go bad once. It was that sort of pain, like a nerve or nerves pulsing. In her tooth, the nerve had been dying. She was afraid to even think about what might be happening inside her brain. And here she was, in the middle of a tangled situation she didn't remember or understand, painfully aware that a killer, or killers on the loose, almost certainly knew a hell of a lot more about what was going on than she did. As independent and self-reliant as she was, Riley had never felt so unsure of herself. She was adept at role-playing. It was one of her strengths, but this was a very, very dangerous game of blind man's bluff, and the one wearing the blindfold, her, had cotton in her ears and a clothespin on her nose as well. With the exception of Gordon, she didn't know who to trust, and he could offer little more than moral support, since if she had even reached any conclusions or formed any theories since arriving here, she had not confided them to him. As for the other man she was intimately close to, Riley, ready to order? She looked across the top of her menu at this pale-eyed stranger whose bed she apparently shared, and ignored the cold knot in the pit of her belly to say calmly, I'm ready. It was the second time she'd said that in the last couple of hours. She only hoped it was true. 3 years previously. You realize what this will mean? Bishop said. A little amused, Riley said, You're a telepath. You know I realize what it will mean. I'm serious, Riley. Are you ever anything else? She got a sudden flash of a strikingly beautiful face and electric blue eyes, understood in an instant who the woman was and what she meant to Bishop, and her question suddenly didn't seem so funny anymore. Never mind, he said. We all have our ghosts. and not many secrets between a telepath and a clairvoyant. You really must believe we can do some good, she said slowly, to willingly expose yourself to so many of us. Deadpan, he said, I didn't think it through. Riley had to laugh, but she shook her head and got the conversation back on its original track. I do understand what you're asking of me. I know it could take months. Will, probably. And you'll have to work alone, at least to all appearances. Well, if you're right about how this killer chooses his victims, and right that the first sign of a task force or police focus is what causes him to change towns, then the only way to track him is alone and off the official books, assuming I can do that. I believe you can. I believe you're the best equipped of anyone in the unit to track him and to make sure he's caught. But, Riley, you don't get too close. Understand? He only kills men. So far. But a cornered animal can kill whatever's threatening it, and he's smart. He's very, very smart. Which is why I hide in plain sight and don't threaten him. Exactly. That's what I do best, Riley said. Present day. In the small part of her mind not occupied with the strain of pretending everything was normal, Riley had struggled to come up with some reasonable excuse for ending up, at the conclusion of this date, in her beach house alone. Short of telling Ash the truth, which she still wasn't ready to do, nothing seemed likely to work without rousing either his suspicion or his anger. Her senses might be AWOL, but that earlier brief flash of memory, plus her instincts as a woman, told her he had every reason to expect to spend the night with her, and despite his calm and almost detached manner during their date, quite definitely did the desire to do so. Still, right up to the moment they walked inside the house and he closed the door behind them, Riley believed she might yet come up with a reasonable, acceptable excuse. She was going to offer a coffee or a drink, but never got the chance. Ash picked her up and carried her to the bedroom. The sheer suddenness of the action, never mind its high-handedness, should have roused some sort of negative reaction in Riley. She was almost sure it should have. Instead, what she felt was an overwhelming sense of familiarity and the first flush of sensual heat sweeping her body. There was, she realized dimly, something incredibly seductive in the certain knowledge that a man not only wanted you, but wanted you now, with no patience for small talk or any of the other social niceties. He wasn't interested in coffee or conversation. He was interested in her, and she was left in absolutely no doubt of that fact. It was just a little bit rough, more than a little bit urgent, and Riley found the combination impossible to resist. So she didn't try. And she didn't try to pretend a response to him because she didn't have to. Whatever else he was or might be, Ash Prescott was a skilled lover, and her body remembered his touch, even if her mind didn't. She left a lamp burning low on her nightstand, but kept her eyes closed because the only senses that mattered were the ones he was bringing to life. For the first time since waking up in the afternoon, there was no veil, no distance, and no questions. Not about this. Their clothing seemed to just vanish. Set on her feet by the bed, Riley almost instantly felt the erotic shock of flesh on flesh, and then the cool smoothness of the sheet beneath her. She had no idea which of them had thrown back the covers, and didn't care. His body was amazingly hard, with the packed muscle of a man who was very athletic, genetically blessed, or both. His skin was smooth and hot beneath her fingers, and the thick, springy hair on his chest teased her breasts with a raw sensuality that only intensified the heat building inside her. His mouth on hers fed that fire, as hard as his body, as urgently demanding as the hand stroking her flesh. That mouth-to-mouth connection was more than a kiss, more than a melding, a merging, and she had the dim understanding that this was why she had tumbled into bed with a relative stranger. Because he wasn't, because they weren't. Their bodies strained together to be closer than they were, closer than they could be, and she heard herself make a wild sound that would have astonished her if she'd been able to think about it. But there was no time to think or wonder about anything. There was only pleasure that built to an incredible peak, and a stunning wave of emotion she never known before and couldn't begin to define. When it was over, Riley felt both exhausted and curiously shaken. What had just happened? It was more than sex, or at least more than she knew sex to be, and she wasn't at all sure she'd be able to pretend otherwise, but she gave it her best shot. When he pushed herself up on an elbow beside her, she finally opened her eyes and murmured, "Wow, good thing I had that second dessert." Ash laughed. "Never say the expected, do you?" "Probably not. Is that a bad thing?" "Not as far as I'm concerned." He reached across her to draw the sheet over their cooling bodies, pausing to briefly nuzzle the curve of her neck. Riley felt her eyes starting to cross at that pleasurable caress and hastily closed them. "If you go to sleep, I'll just wake you up," he warned. Her laugh ended on a sigh. "You have only yourself to blame. Open your eyes and talk to me." "I thought men always wanted to sleep after," she complained mildly, opening her eyes. He was smiling faintly. "You should know by now not to lump me in with a group. Neither one of us runs with the crowd." Now what in the world does he mean by that? She couldn't ask, of course. Instead, she said, "Well, you should know by now that I either sleep after or grab a snack. Fuel, remember? The tank's empty here, pal." "Okay, I promise you a midnight omelet. How's that?" Riley turned her head to look at the alarm clock on the bedside table. "That's more than an hour away." She allowed her voice to fade pathetically. "I may not make it." Before she could turn her head back, she felt his fingers at the nape of her neck. "What's this?" It was a sore spot. She realized that when he touched it. "What does it look like?" she asked, holding on to the sleepy murmur, even though she was now wide awake. He rubbed very gently. "A burn, maybe?" Just at the hairline, at the base of her skull, an area normally covered by her short hair. An area she hadn't checked visually when she examined herself that afternoon. And a sore spot that would have been both hidden by her hair and masked by the headache she'd had almost continually since waking.